Okay, real talk. We have to take a good hard look at what we're doing with our customer journeys because today's customer has changed and we're not keeping pace. We're creating uncomfortable experiences that are costing us sales. So, are you ready to fix the friction? Let's dig in. Welcome to Constructive Insights. I'm Jen Canlish, and today we're going to dig into something a little bit different. As building material brands, we often think about the important things like product performance, very important, our pricing strategy, our supply chain, new innovation. But are we looking enough at how customers experience our brand and experience our products all the way through? And so, what I mean by that is your customers experience your products, your brand, and your presence in many different ways. They're visiting your website, they're talking to reps, they're seeing you at trade shows. And is that experience connected, or is there issues there that's causing friction and causing them to, question whether you're the right brand for them? So, let's start by digging into what I really mean about friction. So, friction doesn't just happen when your shipment's late or when you don't follow through on a commitment. Friction happens from the very beginning in how people are experiencing your brand and market. For example, it's when you say you're easy to work with, you're contractor focused, you're, up on the latest trends and you're driving what's next. But then you show up in ways that are completely disconnected and completely, contradicting to that. Your product sheets are hard to find. Your teams are hard to deal with. You're not actually living up to those promises that you've put out into the world. And that's just a basic example of that friction showing up. And, it's different messages, different systems, different expectations. And what happens is it creates those little moments of hesitation. Friction isn't one big thing, one big, catastrophic failure on our parts that then we lose a customer's trust. It's those little things, those little missed moments, those little moments that make them question, is this right for me? And where we start to lose that trust in the process. And so, why are we talking about this now? Why are we seeing this as a challenge and what's kind of behind it? It really comes down to the fact that the sales funnel is fading as we know it, right? We had this really nice linear process for so long. Our buyers were visiting stages and staying in them for predictable amounts of time, reviewing content, moving on to the next, and we were getting our sales. The problem is today's buyer, the everywhere buyer, isn't doing that. They're coming in from different places, very unexpected places. They're staying in stages longer, and then they're also revisiting stages, hopping back and forth based on where they are. And so this really makes for a more unpredictable process when it comes to mapping that journey. So, who is our everywhere buyer and what are they doing? We know that, surprise, surprise, they're using AI, right? So, instead of looking up products like yours, instead of looking up, flooring options or roof options or certain products by name, by type, they're going right into ChatGPT. They're going right into AI and they're asking it very specific questions about their region, about their pricing, about all of the different things that are going to get them farther down the journey than we used to in the past. They're watching videos on TikTok. They're seeing new products on Instagram. They're talking to people, they're texting, they're figuring out things before they even talk to us as a brand. I think the stats out there, call to the fact that a lot of buyers have done 70% of their research before they even reach out to someone. And I would argue that in this space, that's likely even higher. As we see with building material customers, there's a lot of conversation that naturally happens, and technology has really only amplified that by a million. So it's only natural that we're going to see a lot more, educated, confident buyers coming to the table. And so when we talk about those changes, and we talk about friction, friction is really what happens when we're forcing our everywhere buyer into these outdated kind of linear processes. And so what's happening is, as I talked about, this not only creates trust, but it's creating this kind of point of frustration, right? We're asking them to stitch together their own journeys based on where they're coming in, and it's making for an uncomfortable experience. And so then on our side, it doesn't show up as one big dramatic loss. It's a lot of little moments adding up. It's longer sales cycles. It's increased price sensitivity towards the end of conversations, more questions being asked, more kind of people going with brands that they're already familiar with and more scared to make that switch. And so to us, it might look like, they're changing their mind, they're shopping around, but really it's friction doing its work and causing those problems that are happening to really impact our sales in the end. And so I touched on it a little bit when we talk about the different teams, but it's really important to understand the impact that this everywhere buyer and kind of the disconnected journeys has on different teams, right? Because if you think about it, marketing is having trouble understanding where they end, especially if our everywhere buyer is hopping between stages. Sales doesn't know when to jump in, right? What role do they play? And ultimately, the biggest thing that we need to think about is the experience of the customer, the experience of your buyer. They're not seeing all the different teams that we have internally. They're not seeing all the different channels. They want to experience one single journey, and we need to be able to give that to them, even if handoffs are challenging on our end. Okay, so we realize there's a problem. How do we fix the friction? How do we get out of this kind of disconnected, disjointed experience of all kinds of touch points that are not aligning to the same story? It's really about intentionally building your journey to be connected from the start. And so, what do I mean by connected? So, if we think about it, connection is more than just the same message everywhere. That's consistency. And I would say consistency is table stakes. Having the same messaging, the same look, feel, positioning, that has to be everywhere in your journey. That makes a very comfortable experience when it comes to how people are experiencing your brand. But a connected journey, that's different. That's about creating experiences where each interaction builds on the last. It's about looking at this from an omni-channel and ensuring that we're continually building that trust through every touch point and increasing the value that we're able to provide. Okay, so what does it take to build this connected omni-channel journey? So first, it's all about starting with understanding your customer. And I've said this a million times, but we really need to have a deep understanding of our audience. And that's not just the basic understanding of where they live, what are their buying behaviors, what age are they, and what are their roles. It's really digging in deeper. What motivates them? What are their pain points? What keeps them up at night? And then, especially from a journey perspective, what channels are they most using? How much time are they spending there? Who influences their decisions and where are they going next? Really understanding this is what's going to help us when it comes to shaping those journeys and really connecting to the buyers that matter to our brands. The next tip I would give when it comes to building this omni-channel strategy is making sure that it's grounded in your core promise. And so a lot of brands they'll go out there and they have amazing product shots and a fantastic product, but they're really missing that core promise, that value that they deliver to their customers. And not only is that important to stand out in the market, as you've heard me talk about, but it's really important as that connective tissue between your teams. Making sure that from the first marketing touch to the final sign off, you're telling that same story and you're creating an expectation that's then lived in everything you do. For example, is your differentiator all around being the fastest install time in the industry? If that's the case, then everything around your buyer journey should be easy, should be fast, should be seamless. And if that's the case, your brand's not going to be the one putting out 30-minute explainer videos. You're going to focus on fast content, on quick snapshots, on things that really drive efficiency and make their lives easier. That's what I mean when it comes to really figuring out that promise. Yes, be consistent with the messaging and then live that throughout so it's not that disconnected experience. And one thing I think gets missed there too is personality, right? So not only in the story we're telling and how we're living that, but how you're showing up in, words and how you're showing up in tone and manner and how you address, from marketing to sales, how you address your customers. Are you a sophisticated brand? Are you a mature brand? Are you a youthful brand? These are things that need to be determined so that everything can have that same experience and feel connected to provide that trust. And so my next tip would be all around personalization. So as marketers, we have so much meaty data. And if we're able to use that to better predict and better align our journeys to the personal experience of our customers, that's where we see a lot more success. And this personalization can be done, anywhere from imagery and making sure that backgrounds and the shots that we select are regionally relevant, all the way to how our customers are using our information. If they've just downloaded a great guide on product installation, we're not going to send them something completely irrelevant. We're going to make sure that we're personalizing the journey to what they want to see and how they're experiencing it. Because there's a lot more to personalization than just a salutation line in an email. Obviously, I feel really nice when someone sends me an email that says, "Hi, Jen." But if the content of that email is not aligned to what I want to see, that's a throwaway. And so, next, as you're mapping the journey or what we see as possible journeys, considering different inroads and different ways that your audiences are coming into the conversation, I would also put a very high priority focus on those transition points. And by that, I mean not only the channels. So, for example, moving between social and your website and your email. How do those transitions look? Are they comfortable? Does it make sense what they're receiving and what they're seeing? And then also transitions from an internal perspective. As we're handing off from marketing to sales, what does that transition look like? As we're moving from, you know, sales to distributors and maybe to on ground support, does that still feel the same? It's about pressure testing that to make sure that we're living our promises through each of those transitions. And so, my last tip, and probably my most important, is all around making sure that we build the journey around the individual. And so, what I mean by that is using your data to really track those individual habits. Marketing should have all the data flowing to sales and beyond. And so, this means, of course, using our CDPs, using our CRMs to the best of their ability, making sure that we're aligned on the information that we're tracking and that people are actually using them. There's a lot of really great information that can be shared between teams and that can help to set up better journeys if we're able to really dig in and set those up effectively and use them in every single touch point. We don't want our audiences resetting at every touch point, and being able to shape it very specifically to them is what's going to help to build that confidence. A great example of a brand really living up to this approach is Durkin. And so the work that we do with them is really around helping them live their brand promise, which is building to higher standards. And so every piece of content, every training, everything that we create is really about bringing that to life. So customers come to expect a journey that's really focused on education and focused on, elevating what the industry is doing. And so what happens is now you have a team that's dedicated to that promise. From the marketing materials that they're seeing out in the world to the content they're downloading, the conversations that they're having with reps, it really all connects back to this promise that they're living. Okay, so your brand is out there and you're wondering where to start coming out of today. First, I'd say pressure test. Look at the way that your audience is experiencing your journey and see if there's friction there. See if you're feeling uncomfortable and what's showing up and, what's coming next, and start to pinpoint where you can make that more connected. Pressure test your transitions, not just your channels, making sure you're looking at that holistic omni-channel picture. Listen to your reps. I talk about this a lot, but our sales team is a gold mine of information. Working together is where you're going to be able to learn firsthand of, what are those moments of hesitation? Where are people dropping? What questions do we find that they're asking so that we can get ahead of that and create that comfortable experience and map that? Not the journey that we all see in our slide decks and the ones that we learned in school, but the journey that's actually happening with your specific audience, because that's the one that matters. And ask the question, are we making them work too hard? Are we helping them or are we hindering them? And take a hard look at what's out there. Because at the end of the day, they experience one journey. They want to experience one journey. They don't want to work too hard to piece everything together. And we don't want them to do that. We want them to have a positive experience with our brands and naturally get to the point where they're confident enough to make the sale with us. Your customers are under a lot of pressure right now. There's tighter timelines, stricter budgets. If we're making them work too hard to understand your brand, then we're not doing our job. And they're going to end up defaulting to the brands that make them feel comfortable, that they trust, that they've worked with, that don't make it difficult. And so, doing this and fixing the friction isn't about adding more marketing. We're not, adding on more complexity and making it harder. We want to make it easier. We want to make it seamless. And that's really what it's about, is looking back and figuring out those little moments that are going to make all the difference. Because let's be honest, the brands that are going to win in today's market aren't always the ones with the best product. It's the ones that'll make it easiest to move forward with. Thanks for listening.